So why did I decide to make this video? Likely years after, at a time where you probably don't remember my name, let alone my face. But I put it up on YouTube just because, you can't account for all the variables in the world. You know. There's a couple times I thought that I would try to write this as a letter and send it, but then I figured, it being sent would just get tore up, and, all that work writing it down and just have it thrown away, seems kind of pointless. This way, if you find it, if you choose to watch it, it's your choice, and, you can choose to ignore it as well. But, there are a couple things I aim to do with this video. One is to thank you, and there's like 3 apologies. So let's go down the line one at a time. Let's go with the thank you first. I've got shit to do, so I don't have a lot of time to do this. Thank you for having the courage to leave where I didn't, regardless of the narrative that each of us had in our heads, what is and what isn't, in regards to, perspectives really don't come into the what's actually happening, what's happened. So, like I said, thank you for having the courage to leave, whereas I never would have had the courage to leave, Until this day, this very day that I'm filming this, you are the person that I have loved, will always love more than myself. And because of that, I have just decided that my life, if I can't be with the person that I love most in the world, then my life will be about the accumulation of knowledge, the accumulation of wisdom, and to share perspectives with people who they can benefit before it's too late, And so far, it's been a pretty worthy cause, If you hadn't made that decision to leave, I shudder to think of like what would have happened, Like I would have continued to stick around while you said terrible things to me, and you would wake up hating me, and wouldn't tell me why, And the thing is, it's funny, when I figured out that you cheated, the idea of losing you still, there was nothing I could think of that was worth losing you in my mind. And so, yeah, I would have continued to stick around for as long as it took for you to walk away, like later or sooner or whatever. But it's funny how things work out, because in the things that you said to me, in the way that you valued me, which, let's face it, was really at 0, I can understand that, it took me years to understand that, in a marriage, there has to be 2 people who are both willing to work if they love each other. And if one person already has one foot out the door, then, it's pretty much an indication of how that act is going to close, But because you made that choice and you left, for a long time I wanted to blame you. And, as human beings, like, the one thing that we can do better than any other mammal on the planet is find, rationalizations and, justifications for why it's not our fault, But I eventually came to the point where I realized that, I couldn't blame you for things that I knew that I did, and so I had to sit down with myself and have a very frank and very open dialogue with myself about the lies that I told to myself when we were married. The fact that the woman that I loved, that I was hurting so badly for, didn't actually exist, because I had to create her in my head, because nobody wants to believe that the person they love so much could actually treat them in that way. So, when we were together, I realized it had to be my fault. There's no other way it could be. But when I sat down and I reflected, I realized that, there are things that I can take responsibility for, and there are things that, it's not my business to take responsibility for. It takes two people to, build a relationship, and it takes two people to allow it to fall apart. And, I take ownership of mine. And the reason why I'm thanking you is because it led me to the stupidest decision of my life, stupidest choice of my life, I should say, which was the choice that I needed perspective. I needed to experience more pain than I was experiencing in order to quantify through contrast that you leaving wasn't anything. I've said goodbye to hundreds of girls, there was no reason why it should have did the damage that it did, at least that's what I told myself. And so I decided to throw myself into a situation, set of circumstances that basically meant, I was gonna deal with pain. Pain was gonna become a close friend, and it did. And it taught me. You leaving taught me about people. It taught me about their motivations, but most importantly, it taught me that people say a lot more when their mouths are closed. They say and do things, but very few people fail to consider what those actions, what those words mean on the opposite side of the spectrum, And that's when I really learned that, what was happening was a well-executed plan on your part, except for the fact that you failed to realize that by hacking my Instagram and looking for a reason to blame me, you had already known you were going to leave. And by hacking my Instagram, you needed a reason to blame me so you didn't feel guilt. Which is also the reason I suspect you wouldn't talk to me when you left, and still haven't talked to me to this day, because you run the risk of your narrative falling apart. Which I have little interest in, I don't care how if you choose to blame me, that's fine, There is a point when a person takes on the role of victim so many times that people who have dealt with it enough times begin to realize it, and the fact that people lean into being a victim rather than, choosing to see a positive, it was a dead giveaway. And so, it told me that, the last at least 3 months of our relationship, you had to fake it with me. And I think that's the part that really got me, was knowing that was all fake. Your letter was just to bide time. But by you leaving, I came to the conclusion that, one, you must be right and I must be worthless, And I came to the conclusion that in order to recalibrate, I needed to really experience pain in the ultimate. And so that's what I did, and I put myself through all kinds of punishment, but the one thing I could not do, I could not shake, was my willingness to step in between people who were undeserving of something they didn't see coming. By this point, I had learned to see things like dominoes falling, and I could watch as someone would tip a domino, and I would know exactly where it would end. And so a lot of people needed help, and there wasn't a lot of people where I was that were offering help, at least not for free. And so I thought, if I'm worthless, I've got nothing to lose. I don't have anything, I've lost everything. That puts me in a very actionable position, because I realized that a man who has nothing to lose becomes very dangerous. And how that tool is used could be either very dangerous or it could be very useful. And as it happens, I decided that I was going to allow that tool to be for good. And so when I saw people hurting other people, when I saw people being taken advantage of, when I saw kids being taken advantage of, I stepped in between it, and I offered my blood in trade, because I had already determined that my life was less valuable than all of theirs. I had already fucked up my life, and so to me it was allowing them a chance to do things differently, I guess, and so in a roundabout way, because of you, there's 6 girls, or 6 women, and 1 little girl who was experiencing what I can only describe as hell, that now have lives that would have been lost, and it's how you saw me, and it's how you said goodbye, or didn't say goodbye, whatever. It was that mechanism that allowed for me to see myself as worthless, and then use that as this kind of superpower. And in making that choice, involving myself in those situations, I then became acquainted with pain, and I bled and was stabbed, and I was shot at and winged, and and these are all consequences of good things I was trying to do, and bad people who didn't want me doing them, but I kept walking into odds that were stacked against me, and I would be the one that came out on top. And I may be covered in blood, soaked in blood, and have a screwdriver, jammed into my fucking rib cage, but I was the one standing, because I knew that nobody else was going to stand up for these people. Nobody else was going to care what was happening to them. And I couldn't let the hope that I had lost happen to them, because that fire of hope is hard to restoke. It's easy to put out, but rekindling that flame is damn near impossible. And so, after I had my fill of that, and I eventually realized, what I needed to do was go to rehab. And so that's what I did. I went to rehab, and And the funny thing is, they actually let me out of rehab, much earlier than they should have. And it was because, as the lady said, you already understand the lessons that we're trying to teach, so all you're doing is wasting your time. So they got special permission to release me after I had, got all the chemicals out of my system. And since then, I thought to myself, what can I do to make it so the time you and I spent together wasn't for nothing? And I eventually came to the proper decision, which was to learn from it. And I reflected on everything. I pulled back as far as you could. I Google Earthed it, And so I examined everything, and I realized that two people who did not know how to make a successful marriage work were attempting to make a successful marriage work without any idea of how to do it, and without being willing to do it together, and I realized the assumptions that were made and the expectations were the problem, because to assume that what you want is what you want is to assume that you have all the variables that could happen. But I remember you used to say that we had so much, we didn't have anything in common, and you thought that was a bad thing. But to me, that was the ideal situation, because I already knew about the things I knew about. I wanted to learn about the things that I didn't know about, and the only way to do that is with somebody who is a part of that, someone that can lead me on a new adventure. And you did, and I enjoyed all of those adventures, and for me, it was a proud moment when I realized that, I had finally met somebody who I could honestly say I loved more than myself. Someone who I would give my life to protect, And I thought that by sticking around and by, kind of taking, the words that you said to me, and, the way you treated me at times, and I tried to improve myself, that I could eventually make you see that, that I was that guy, I was the person worthy of your love. But you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink, And so I also realized that, at that point, the person that I loved no longer was a real person. It was a caricature that I had created in my head. A person that was mean and critical of my actions and, who I was. But in a way that I assumed was because she saw the person I could be and was trying to put me in that place. And when it came down to it, it became clear that what it was an attempt to turn me into what you already had, and that, you loved Dan, and that's what it was, and I was never going to be Dan. And then I realized that the choices made that led to us being together, you started to resent me for, and it was at that point I realized that there was nothing I could do, And so I stopped trying. I knew I could have tried harder, but I didn't. And, the thing was, when someone knows they need to work at something and they choose not to, they're giving up. And that's essentially what I had done. I had given up. I knew that things were coming to an end no matter what I said or did. I knew that, you were looking for reasons to blame me. That day that I came in and I was honest with you, and you were in bed and you just stayed there and seemingly catatonic for the rest of the day, I thought it's because you finally realized the truth, but it became clear to me long after that the narrative you had built that allowed you to not feel guilt in what you were going to do, I had just taken away from you. And the first chance you got to latch on to the idea that your narrative was still true, you took it. And I didn't help anything because I said, yeah, you're right, because I was just pissed off, and the reality is, I had never been treated more cruelly in my life, but I recognize that, a lot of that, was because you didn't have anybody else to, to take aggressions out on, and, for all intents and purposes, all you had was me. So I got to see the best days, and I got to experience the worst days, And when you left on your trip and you came back 5 days late, I think it was, I knew already what had happened. And at that point, I started the clock, and it was in your arguments, it was in the things you said to me that you gave away, you had done something as a retaliation for something you assumed that I had done, but you had ignored all the other things that were actually true, You ignored the fact that despite the abuse that you kind of withered on me, needlessly, the fact that, there was always something wrong with what I was doing, I still was there and I was still trying. The one thing I do wish, though, is when you told me, I deserve better than you, the one thing I wish I could go back and I could say is, okay, let's see the fucking accounting. Let's see you calculate it. Put it on paper. Show me what it is that you think you bring to the table that makes you deserve more than someone who loves you unconditionally. Let's see it. I'll wait. But I didn't. I didn't have any balls, I didn't want to fight with you, I wanted you to see me as this man who loved you, and, I lied to Kevin, I lied to people at work just to, get a job when John let us down. And then, when you were worried, I would have lied, cheated, killed, whatever to make sure we were okay. And unfortunately, when I got you a job there, everything I had done in order to get a job quickly, was used against me. And rather than choosing to see things for how they were, you chose to see them in the light of the people who had no interest in whether or not you were happy or not. They wanted to make my life harder, And I realized then that it was always like that, near the end, you would call me out as a liar for something that you weren't around for. You would behave as though I hit you, and you would immediately go into victim mode, even though you were victimizing me. And I realized, like, this person is not the person that I thought I had. But that was all my fault, because I had to lie to myself, That wasn't your fault. You were never shy about letting me know that you thought I was less than you, and I deserved less. Like, you deserved more. Like, you were better than me. You let me know that frequently, I still remember the day you moved in, the day that Dan told you to leave, and out of nowhere, the things that you said to me, I just thought to myself, like, wow, the desire, that emotion bubbling up is so toxic, that she would say such a horrible thing to someone who already loves her so much, But, in everything that happened, I don't regret any of it, because it turned me into a different man. It taught me so much, it's sharpened my abilities to read people and to understand, that a lot of what's happening is, just social contract bullshit. And I'm the guy that gets to the point, And, like, I have stopped lying to myself. And I have stopped accommodating other people's needs to be lied to in order to achieve an end. And if it hadn't been for you leaving the way you did, I wouldn't have decided to chase my own goals of being an artist, and then the universe started rewarding me, like this is my clothing company, like, my paintings sell, like, people who are getting my paintings appraised are getting them appraised for, like $5 to $10 to $12, $15,000. Like, there are people that come looking for my artwork, and for every piece of artwork I sell, I go out in the streets at night and I leave one for someone to find, because the idea that someone could be having a bad day and run into something like that, and that would make them smile, that makes me smile, I no longer use words like blame or fault. Those are words of the past, and they ultimately serve nothing. Right and wrong don't interest me, because being right is indicative of having all the facts. Being wrong is indicative of somebody acknowledging that another person has all the facts, when the one thing that I've come to learn above all else is that for everything I think I know, I ultimately know nothing. We're all just walking around in the dark trying to find a path, and a few of us have flashlights, and so we follow those lights, and we hope things go well. But the sad thing is, you can't make someone understand what unconditional love is worth until they have it for somebody else and they lose it. And then even then, they have to be willing to look at it from the other person's side. And that was the one thing about us that we could just never get right. It was, you never really looked at things from my side, and you looked at them from yours. But the reason I'm thanking you for that is because people have their lives today because of that. People have a little girl who was being very badly hurt is now living a good life back home with her parents, and, well, one of her parents anyway. I still get calls on my phone to this day from people who just happen to have my number in their purse or wallet or whatever, and somebody needs help, and so they pass my number along, and I help them, And like since then, John and Jacqueline, they've loved pretending to be you, and sending me messages pretending to be you or someone that knows you, trying to rile me up, and I remember John challenged me to a one-on-one fight twice. And the first time, 6 people were with him, and the second time he had somebody hiding behind a trash can in a garage. And when we squared up, he had his friend come out, and I laughed and I laughed, because to me that was a compliment, and I sent him multiple texts saying, I keep hearing you saying that you beat me up, but you fail to tell people the truth. And the thing was, when people would bring it up, I wouldn't say anything. I wouldn't rat them out, because it wasn't that important to me, And so I kept texting him. I must have texted him 40 times, like, you name a place and a time, I'll come by myself, without a weapon, without backup. It'll just be me. And after I kick this shit out of you, I'll even let you tell people that you won. I just need you to know. To shut your fucking mouth. And he never once took me up on it. As a matter of fact, he moved out of state. And it's just funny how things work. Funny how, those two, I did so much to help them to try to make their lives better, and what they did was, in return, make my life worse. And to know that you took their side, to know that you cheated, like when we discussed, if you stop loving me, just tell me and I'll make it easy, But, I can't change the past, and, I'm sorry for how I behaved after you left, A lot of reflection had to happen in order for that to take place, in order for me to, grow up. And I apologize to your mom, for the hell I put her through, just because I was trying to teach you a lesson, And the lesson was, I just wanted you to learn that how you treat people, like, it has consequences, And hopefully maybe you've learned that. If not, I don't know. I don't really care. It doesn't concern me anymore. But, I just want to let you know that I finally get it, and I see how things are meant to be and how they're not. And I will forever be grateful to you for being the catalyst that allowed me to learn so much about myself and so much about the society around me, Even people who stab me in the back, I'll treat them kindly, The only thing I won't stand for is if I see a guy hit a girl, then I will go and I'll intervene, And sometimes that's worked out to my advantage, and other times it's got me cracked in the back of the head with, like a beer mug. But, I am on my best path, or at least I think I am on my best path to be the best version of myself that I can be. And I'm chasing the dreams that I have, and I'm content with being alone for the rest of my life, because after you've seen a certain amount of things, then you can't ignore certain realities. And I don't belong. I don't belong in normal society anymore, you know. I keep to myself. I have a handful of friends, you know. It's really strange because, you know, I've made it clear that I'm not interested in dating, and for some reason, like, I don't know what, it's like ringing a dinner bell, and, you know, it's like to have women come up to me and get mad at me when, like, you know, when really attractive women get turned down, you know, they treat it like an insult, and it's like I'm telling them this just has nothing to do with you, and has everything to do with the fact that I'm not willing to put up with your bullshit. I'm putting up with my bullshit, and that's enough for right now. And you know, it's funny. People always say they want honesty. The other thing I've learned is, for all the people who say they want honesty, very few people want it. When they get it, they are immediately regretful of asking for it. You leaving has sharpened me up. It's made me objective to myself, and I hold myself accountable for things. And I realize that, you know, should I do something that creates collateral damage, that even if that wasn't my intention, if there was damage, then I owe it to that person to take responsibility. And I think that, however this storyline ends with me, you know, I think whether it's bloody and violent, or whether it's something like, you know, a brain tumor or something, I'm at the point where I'm okay with that, you know. Like, I've learned pretty much everything I can in regards to, you know, what I'm capable of changing and what I'm not capable of changing. And you know, again, I'm sorry for my behavior after you left. I'm sorry to your mom for my behavior. I thank you for having the courage to leave and allowing me to learn these things, to be the person that ushers in the era of reflection, you know. And I hope that wherever you are now, you know, you are happy and you are thriving, and I know it's strange to say, but I hope that, you know, I hope you're living a life where you never have to think about me again. Just because, you know, a person in a story, you know, has served their narrative function, that doesn't cheapen the story, you know. It just means that their part in the story is done. Yeah. And you've allowed me to grow simply by taking note of how you dealt with things, and deciding that, you know, I wasn't going to end up like that. I'll take responsibilities, I'll take my lumps, you know. And in doing so, the world rewards me, you know. There's art of mine hanging in Paris, hanging in Germany, hanging in Saudi Arabia for some reason. You know, there's art of mine hanging all over the United States, you know. People pay thousands of dollars for it. I get commissions from musicians and, you know, people who make me sign non-disclosures. It's my dream, you know. And all it took was me, you know, losing the person that I love most in the world. And if I could go back and change anything, I wouldn't change a thing. I like who I am today. And I have to be honest and thank you for allowing for the window for all this to take place, for me to become the better man that I've become. So thank you. You know, I hope you find happiness, and I hope you find someone that you don't want to be cruel to, you don't want to hurt, you know, someone who you recognize the love that they have for you. And I hope that love lasts, and I hope that, you know, you have far more smiles than you do frowns for the rest of your time. Anyway, like I said, got shit to do. I know this video probably won't find you, you know, and that's okay, but I want it out there, you know, just in case the universe sees fit to put it in front of you. Yeah. Anyway, as always, I will always love you. So, I love you, and I hope that you are happy with whatever you're doing, wherever you are, and I hope it continues to get happier for you. And I mean that down to the deepest parts of my soul, you know. And again, I am sorry for how I behaved in the immediate aftermath, but I was very new to, you know, I'd been with a lot of women, and saying goodbye was never a problem, but with you, I gave you my entire heart, and so when you left, I had no fucking clue how to behave. So I apologize for my choices, and please let your mom know that I apologize for those choices as well. Yeah. Anyway, you take care, and you know, just know that you may think that our time together was a waste of your time, but you helped to create a better man, and that better man has helped to make a better world, you know, in the little bits that I can. And I try every day to be a little better. Anyway, that's it. Get out of here.